Hello, my friends. Let's talk about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It won't surprise anyone when I say that JoJo is one of the best shonen action shows ever made. The first episode I ever watched was approximately 7 minutes of the final episode of Season 1. The little vampire guy, Dio being Dio, and the typical dynamic scene shifting and color palettes of anime cranked up to 9,000 was just too much crazy to watch at a glance on my way past the foreign exchange student's dormitory living room while I was living in Japan. But thanks to the constant shilling and hyping of the Two Best Friends Play channel, I decided to use JoJo as a form of escapism during my short stint at Pepperdine Law. Of course, philosophy and video games were still present as their own forms of escapism, but JoJo pretty much took over all of my free time for a few months. Needless to say, I was very shocked when switching from the first arc of JoJo to Battle Tendency. The story of Jonathan Joestar, the true gentleman ideal, switching to Joseph Joestar, the lying, coward, playboy scumbag with a heart of gold, was basically like watching an entirely separate show. But it was still hugely entertaining, so I stayed on board. But from here on out, our main protagonists are all assholes. Jotaro is purposefully aloof, cross, violent, and disrespectful towards his mother, but he is ultimately motivated by his love for his mother and keeping her out of harm's way. He puts himself in holding at the local police station to keep this dangerous ghost, as he describes it, away from her when his stand appears, and goes on a huge quest to save her. And Josuke too, being a punk, always skipping class, overly vain. The one thing Josuke is not is violent, hence his stand's power to fix anything that he breaks. He doesn't want anyone around him or in his town to be hurt. To Josuke, every time he punches a person through the gut, it isn't violence because he can just immediately fix it. And the early parts of the Diamond is Unbreakable arc is mainly about the struggle Josuke has to learn the acceptance of necessary violence in pursuit of justice under the guidance of Jotaro. In looking at all these different characters, I was impressed how the styles and tone of JoJo could encapsulate so many different stories and main characters that have so little in common with one another. But at some point, I had a realization. Despite all of these differences, JoJo and all of his descendants live by the same social and moral philosophy. How could I make such a bold assertion that the proper wealthy gentleman Jonathan Joestar has the same philosophy that remains with the almost criminal thuggery of his heirs? Well, I'll show you, because this philosophy is called Zhanghe. Zhanghe is the social ethical philosophy of the martial community. Literally translating to rivers and lakes from Mandarin Chinese, it is a symbol that represents the relationship between the strong individuals tied together by community. First developed in Buddhist monasteries, gradually toward the end of the Ming Dynasty in China, the philosophic system spread to small disparate communities alongside the spread of Chinese martial arts that were tied to various religious communities. Not only did these philosophies of martial Buddhism spread into samurai Budo, but also throughout southern China and Southeast Asia, finding their way into being adopted by organized criminal organizations to create more secure power structures. The subject is endlessly fascinating, and I did my senior thesis on this rarely studied aspect of Chinese culture, so if you're interested, I suggest you read the book Gods, Ghosts, and Gangsters by Avron Boretz. Hell, even that title might as well be named Dio, Stans, and the Joestars for my purposes. But without more stalling, let's talk about what this philosophy actually says. Now, Zhanghe is an ethical philosophy, meaning it prescribes a certain way of life, and unlike Western philosophy, it wasn't invented by a single person, but grew into a body of beliefs through the community of Chinese martial arts over time. Like in many martial arts, it is a philosophy that learned to create and control violence towards a non-violent end. That end is a non-violent social resistance, but that resistance is not revolutionary. It is a statement by a small counterculture that says, we will not and do not want to interfere with you, but you cannot interfere with us. And that small countercultural power ends up forcing the larger empowered society to change so as to accommodate that counterculture's independent existence. Once that mutual independence is violated by the larger society, however, the strong individuals of the Zhanghe set out to restore the status quo of their individual liberties. And most importantly, they stop fighting as soon as the interference is solved. The Zhanghe is never the aggressor nor the invader, and as a side note, leaders of the community routinely demonstrate their control of violence in displays of martial technique, but also by holding poses during these demonstrations of power that reference and conjure the image of ruling gods and spirits in their respective cultural contexts. Now, I shouldn't have to tell you that holding extravagant poses to demonstrate control and power in the course of a fight or demonstration is the most JoJo thing ever, but I saw that the Joestars each encounters a villain that essentially invades and interferes with their own way of life. Each Joestar moves to stop them, to reinstate the original dynamic of their lives, and because of the unrelenting ambition of the villains, have no choice but to fully destroy their opponents to do so. Dio bullies and disrupts Jonathan's peaceful home life. Jonathan originally tries to get Dio to just stop, but as Dio's narcissism drives him to pursue godhood through vampirism and other things, it becomes apparent that Jonathan's normal life can't be restored with Dio's existence as an invader. Such was the same dynamic between Joseph and the Pillarmen, which would never have been thwarted if it weren't for Straits trying to kill Joseph just for being Jonathan's descendant, and thus a potential threat to his own plans for immortality as a vampire. And the non-revolutionary aspect of the philosophy would account for why Joseph wasn't pushy against the whole Nazi regime thing when encountering Stroheim. Jotaro's whole character was flatly motivated by caring for his mother and thus his family. But that was interfered with when Dio literally invaded his family through Jonathan Joestar's corpse. And Josuke, who was entirely about living a peaceful life in his hometown of Moriocho, was invaded by Yoshikage Kira's psychopathic desire to kill people. While not being nearly the grandest or most powerful JoJo villain, I believe this is why I like Kira Yoshikage as a villain more than all of the others. Because Kira too is a Zhanghe practitioner. All he wants is a peaceful and ordinary life in Moriocho. He wants to be remarkably normal. He wants to be left alone, and for the most part, leave everyone else alone too. The problem is that his serial killer mind won't let him be that, and he inevitably clashes with another Zhanghe community due to stand users' uncanny ability to find each other. Kira is a completely sympathetic villain who absolutely needs to die, because his death is the only way to restore justice, to make the community whole again. Now, I fully admit that I have no specific proof of Hirohiko Araki purposefully studying and including Zhanghe philosophy in the series, but given its historical spread into Japan and being tied to samurai religious culture, which is integral to the Japanese cultural identity, and given that Hamon breathing from Season 1 comes from a Buddhist-esque religious group that practices martial arts, I think it is most likely that Araki is at least aware of the system of beliefs, if not the specific word or the specific culture behind it. JoJo is surprisingly philosophically complex. When I first started watching it, I didn't think there was going to be any chance that I would turn it into one of my videos here on this channel. And the fact that it was so philosophically consistent throughout was even more surprising. I'm going to admit that I'm a bit of an anime plebe, so I don't actually read the JoJo manga, I just follow the anime series. But I will be excited to see if this system of ideas continues as the story and character dynamics change. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Comment with your own ideas on JoJo's themes if you think I've missed something, and there might be something else I could make a video about. Subscribe for more and consider supporting me on Patreon if you have the means. I'll see you next time, and as always, stay true.